Okay.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Final Answer, AI critical thinking and process-based assessment. Let's see. So here we are. My name's Judy Littlejohn. I'm the Director of Online Learning at Genesee Community College in Batavia. And
Um,
with me is Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Wessel, an instructional designer at Genesee Community College, and I am adjunct instructor as well.
And I'm John Kane in the teaching center here at SUNY Oswego and in the economics department.
All right, so we want to welcome you, of course. I'm going to share a link in the chat to a Google Drive folder that has this PowerPoint in it, as well as some other resources that we'll get to later on. But there's that link. So, but today we just want to emphasize, and welcome you and say that we're not here to demonstrate tools. We're here to talk about design and how we're designing our summative assessments to ensure that students are showing their learning and not just producing an answer. So you'll leave here with a concrete way to move assignments beyond final answer grading and toward evidence of student thinking. So we want to see the thinking process. And so, where am I? Okay. So just going to frame the reality. So we know that students can use AI to brainstorm, summarize, revise, and draft. And like not every use of AI is incorrect or dishonest. Like students can legitimately use AI in a productive way. But as a result, the final product that we receive from our students is not always reliable evidence of what they've learned. So this is what we're trying to solve, or we want to ensure that we know students are gaining the knowledge and thinking through how to demonstrate the knowledge and solve the problems and so forth. So, so we want to think about this for a few minutes and just say, like, if the students can take an essay question and within 2 minutes have a 5-page essay generated by Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT. But what does that mean? What does that mean to their transcript, to us submitting their final grades, to them transferring to another institution or applying for a job? So we need to, instead of just looking for that bottom line, their conclusion, we need other evidence, right? That they went through a process, gained this knowledge, determined what they wanted to produce, and show us, demonstrate their critical thinking process. How did they evaluate the evidence that they found, and how did they decide what to include, what to leave out, and how they were going to approach the question to solve it. So we want to say that like detection and prohibition of AI is not the answer. We can't just say, Turnitin says you're 70%, like plagiarized. So that means you fail. Like we know that Turnitin isn't reliable. We know that students, as we already stated, they can use AI to help them revise and brainstorm. So we just need ways to understand what the students learned and not worry as much about policing how they're demonstrating it. So for that, our main point here is a shift, right? So we're going to shift from focusing and weighing heavily these final answers to the process, the thinking, the judgment, how they made decisions, how they did their reflection, and what evidence that they're showing us. So let's see where we are. We're going to shift now as well. Um, so we're going to say, like, if AI can generate the final answer, what are we assessing then? What do we need to assess?
Okay, so real quickly, I'd like to just ask you guys, what is your discipline? What is your specific discipline? Just out of curiosity, if you don't mind
I work for the music department at SUNY Oswego, and I teach audio recording and production.
sharing.
So process versus product is something I deal with a lot. Yeah.
Yes. Excellent.
I am in the Department of Economics. I teach both like principal courses and upper level courses as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Hashim, if you want to just drop it in the chat, that would be fine. Lexi? Okay. All right. I was just curious because so I've been teaching English for many years in communications, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be framed in that way, but there are certainly ways that you can use this five shifts method to modify your own experience and your students' experience within your discipline. So, as Judy said before, we don't want to just grade the final answer. So in my case, that would generally be a revised draft, right? I've got an essay, woo. But now what I really want to focus on, not putting all of my weighted grade onto that final essay. I want to make sure that I am looking at their process and really helping them critically analyze what their choices they're making along the way. And that is what I'm gonna focus on. So we can shift over to the next slide. And here we go, the five shifts. So we're going from product, the essay, to process. And of course, the writing process is already a process. So it should not be overly challenging for English instructors who have been doing this to adjust, but it does take some adjustment. People, they like what they do, and it's just time to make a little shift. Um, the second one is going from writing. Of course, we're still going to write. It's English. And but we're also going to do metacognition, where we are reflecting on our thinking and what we decided to do along the way, what worked, what didn't. And summary, of course, summary is very basic, but judgment is much more critically important. So they're analyzing sources, they are working with AI and deciding how that's looking. And I'm going to show you some of that moving forward in a minute. Then we have written only, which I like to do the multimodal presentations. I like my students that take their essay or their information and present it in a way where they can be more creative, in a way that they can demonstrate their skills in other ways and their understanding of their subject matter. And then, of course, prohibition has always worked historically, but not actually, right? Students are going to, people are going to use the tools available to them. So my conversation with my students is, how do we stay human and use the tools ethically? Which is, of course, I understand in the music arena, it's a really tough thing, and artists are, yeah, I mean, it's I understand, Daniel, where probably your biggest fears are and how AI is potentially rewriting what it means to produce art, music, right? So
Exactly. Yep.
yeah, yeah, it takes away from the human experience.
I
Um,
agree.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know you do. And then of course, so what I want to have my students do is make sure that I'm telling them, we're going to use AI. And a lot of the reaction I get is, she's what? Like, and it's like, yeah, we're actually going to use it, but not yet. First, you have to do some thinking. And then they're going to have to do more thinking with AI. But that's how I try to frame things. How, as an ethical human being, are we going to use our tools available to us? Okay, I think we can go. Oh, and Stephen Bowell he's in the references, and he wrote about the five shifts in addition. So you can take a look at that at some point.
Sorry about that.
It's all right.
So I just wanted them to see his name at the bottom there. He's also in our folder, in the list of resources. So, okay.
Okay, so traditionally in writing-based courses, you'd see an assignment like this. We've all seen these, whether you teach with essays or you were a student, right? Write an essay explaining blah, 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 blah. Use three sources, use MLA formatting, etc. Okay. By a show of hands, who thinks AI can't do this assignment? I guess I should actually look at everybody. Okay, fantastic. All right. Yeah, we know AI can do this. In fact, I had AI do this. Judy, do you mind bringing that up? Oh, did you put it in the chat?
I did put it in the chat, but I can also click on it.
Thank you. Okay. So I asked Copilot, Microsoft's AI, and it said, here's what I'm going to provide a student when it asks me for an essay on whatever that topic was, causes of the American Revolution. And in fact, in about 45 seconds, it produced all these paragraphs, which it's organized. I didn't read it. I obviously I'm not interested in reading it, but it's organized. It's into certain topics. It supports itself. It has a conclusion. It has references. Who knows if they exist or not? And it's done. So why would I say, oh, students, 60% of your grade is going to be your final essay? Okay, pass. Everyone's passed, right? And then highlighted there at the bottom, Copilot says to me, if you'd like, I can grade it for you too. Like, so now we've taken the students out of it and we've taken the instructor out of it. So who's learning anything? Who's producing work? So that's where the shift has to come in. And we can go back. Thank you. So of course, now I want to do the after assignment. And what I mean is the redesign of working with AI for an essay assignment, but how I'm going to reframe what's important. Okay. Of course, the essay is still important. They still need to demonstrate what they've learned, their understanding of the topic. But as we just saw, they can pretend pretty good. Oh,
I'm so sorry.
that's all right. No worries.
I was trying to click on the link and
It's not going to come up. That's okay. I can.
no, it's there.
All right. So for the one course I teach, composition, natural and social sciences, this is where I have begun this ethical AI conversation. And we're briefly going to just take a look at the 5 shifts that I've put in action for this course. To be fair, I've only run it once this past spring, but I will be modifying and moving forward as feedback comes back, and I work with other instructors to bounce ideas off of. So for number 1, product versus process, we already talked about that. A final essay doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me what my students learned. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to make sure that students are brainstorming on their own. They're going to then brainstorm with ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever AI of their choice. And we're going to make sure the evidence is there that they have in fact learned from my course, because why am I there if they can't? So down there, it makes the final essay part of the assignment, but not the most important part of the learning experience. For shift number 2, metacognition, I've been using this for years, and I know a lot of writing instructors, at least in the English area, use this. You know, what did you do? What kind of decisions did you make? Generally, this would happen after an assignment, but I'm going to have them do this along the way as well. When they have to communicate with AI, I'm going to ask them, what did AI do well? Tell me something it didn't do as well as you had hoped, right? Like they really are going to have to think. They're going to have to dive into it. And how does it change their role as a researcher in the process? Can they just say, hey, I need 5 sources about this topic, and then it gives them to them? And then did they stop there? Or did they go in? Did they look at them? Did they run a credibility check on them? You know, what were they surprised by? These kinds of things. So it's AI, yeah, so like that says, AI can produce sentences, but I don't, that's not the important part. Okay. Shift number 3, going from summary to judgment. So students can summarize, AI can summarize. I can put in any reading and say, you know, break this down to 200 words for me, and it'll get it. You know, it may not be perfect, but it can pull out the main points, and it's not an issue. So what I want to focus on is the process of how well are they really diving into a source? Are they checking the author, the corporation, who's publishing it and why? What are their biases and things like that? They have to put all this material together to show me that they've done the process, the writing process, which is important. Okay. So, yeah, so I will be having them initially, they do some brainstorming about their topic of choice, and then they find 2 sources because I'm having them do a controversial topic where they have to find at least 2 sources, one for either side of a debate. Okay. And then I want them to do a metacognition on that, make sure that they read the information, how well does it represent, what is it missing in its you know, in its methodology maybe. And then I'm asking them to go to AI. And then I'm saying, hey, you know, what did I miss in my thinking? What kind of sources are generally cited for this type of argument? And then I ask it to give me, the student, additional sources. And now they have to analyze the red flags that came up, you know, why they chose certain sources. Are they giving them scholarly journal articles, etc.? So there are some specific questions I have them ask, but regardless of the conversation, they then have to copy, paste, produce, download, whatever, that conversation as part of their evidence of having thought with the tool. So, and then for number 4, the shift. So I think this is the fun part. I mean, I enjoy research, but it's pretty exciting when you've got a classroom full of students, and I don't know about your disciplines. I'm sure music is way different. But in my discipline of English, they have to take it. There's no option, you know, and half the time students are saying, I hate English, I hate writing, I don't read. And that is just, that's just the nature of teaching English, liberal arts. So what this additional element to this project is that They get to now be creative. They get to do a PowerPoint presentation with audio narration, or they can do a podcast, or they can do an infographic, and some other way to demonstrate their learning and understanding of the topic. And yes, AI can do a lot of it. But this is usually the part that students are like, yeah, that sounds kind of fun. And I give them choice. So choice is always a good thing. Let's see. So yeah, I have them introduce the topic, make sure that they talk about the competing perspectives on the debate, highlight key evidence, and talk about how AI played a role in their process. And in addition to that, of course, I am not of course, but I am requiring them to use certain accessibility um, features to make sure that they are, again, we're connected to the ethical conversation we started with. It's not technology, it's people. So how do we make our products accessible to an audience? Okay, and then the final shift, prohibition and AI disclosure. From day one, I've been telling English instructors or anybody who has had some hesitations about using AI, it's not going anywhere. You can tell them they can't use it. Guess what? A third of them are going to use it anyway, right? We were told once upon a time we would not have calculators in our pocket. Well, guess what? I have a whole computer, so there's no point in my opinion, there is no point in saying don't touch it. However, in your certain disciplines, you're going to have to decide when you're going to allow them to explore it with their topic. And then the idea is if you give them that option to try something with it, they may not use it all the time. They may say, okay, I am allowed to run this through this process. So two items that I allow my students without permission to do, and I'm going to wrap this up because I know we have more to go through, but I allow my students to run Grammarly on their spelling and grammar. Please do. It's been there forever. They've been using it forever. Absolutely. It's a great tool. And citation generators. Now, that probably makes me the black sheep in the English department, but I don't care if you know where to put all the periods. That's what the tool is for. So they don't have to ask my permission for that. And then let's see, they'll do some more metacognition. And basically they have to use it appropriately, cite their AI tool, give a little explanation of how AI was used, how it benefited, how it just didn't hit the mark. And phew, that's that assignment. And it is incredibly lengthy and it takes quite a bit of time, but I think the process is worth it. Okay, and then, okay, so I gave him an essay. Of course I did. I'm an English teacher. It's still the same topic. It's still the same thing that I want them to learn. But what they may not have realized before the reframing of this assignment is that I'm looking at everything. Every little piece of the process is so important. And now I'm reframing my grading policies, of course, and I'm going to say, okay, the final essay is not the big bad, heavyweight of the graded book. Each part of the process matters. So.
All right. So, and as Sarah just mentioned there at the end of that, the weighting what you're grading is super important here. So instead of just saying, or not just saying, but instead of putting all the emphasis on that final product, if her final essay were 100 points and you did it or you didn't, now she can break that down into, you know, 25 points for the process, 25 points for the thinking, 25 points for the judgment. And so that you're distributing their final grade calculation based on the evidence the students are showing you as far as their thinking goes, their judgment, their decision making. So it's really important at this point that you also update your grading rubrics to go with those summative assessments. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and go over to John, who has an activity for you.
I get the easy part. You guys have the harder part now. So what we're going to ask you to do is to think about one of the assignments you normally do and think about how you could use three or more of those shifts, three or more of those five shifts that were listed before, and implement that. And in that resource package, we have a fillable form that you could either use, make a copy of it and use, or just look through it and think about how you could take one of your assignments and bring in some metacognition, to bring in more of the process, to evaluate it, how you could have students reflect on the activity, and how you can have them explain what they're doing and so forth. So now it's your turn to do some work. And if you yeah, the folder is right there, and it's right in that folder that Judy just shared in the chat again. And if you'd like to say something or ask any questions, just do that either in the chat or keep your mic open. And we'll let you do some work and see what you might be able to come up with.
I'm going to just see here. Whoops. No, I'm not. Okay, there we go. I wanted to get a link right to that. They need what is it we're looking for?
It is the
That's the
PDF.
wrong folder.
It's in the other folder.
Oh, yeah, I nabbed it.
We have two versions of this, one for us and putting it together and one that we shared.
All right, I'm going to go in here. The
Yeah, you
fillable
want to see our
technical
process.
That's all right. Here. I'll put the link here. All right. So this is the worksheet. You can download it. It is fillable. You could print it and write on it, whatever way you like to interact with things like that. And the goal or the hope is that we're choosing at least three things to change: the process, the AI use, the judgment, reflection, or explanation.
And basically, we always wanted to capture the skills that students were developing, but we used to be able to do it by looking at their output. That just doesn't work anymore. So we have to go back and actually try to more directly assess the skills that they're developing while they're working on these activities. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I do like these ideas, you know. One of the things I do in my recording one class, John, is I have students design a project recording studio based on their own individual needs. And it is part of the writing plan we have in our major. And honestly, it was something that was kind of, I don't want to say forced on me to add to the class, but it was something that we needed to do for our writing plan. We have the music history classes and other classes where writing assignments, traditionally are found. And, I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And it has been good because it's something that students actually are interested in. I give them here's $10,000 budget, what kind of studio could you come up with? So they have to figure out what they what they want to do first. And then they have to go out and, find the different components and how they all integrate. And it's been a good assignment, but it is one that is a lot of times it is kind of like pulling teeth from some students who, aren't really super fired up about writing a big paper or anything. So I like these ideas, think about the process and certainly, over the product and using their own judgment and reflection on, how did you come up with this? And instead of just, well, somebody told me this was a good microphone I should buy. Um, so yeah, I think there's some things that I would make my assignment better, if I use some of these ideas we were just talking about, for sure.
Just as a little side, that is a great assignment because it is an authentic activity that they could see themselves doing. So they might be more likely to rely on their own efforts rather than going to AI for much of the task.
Yeah, I tell them when I introduce the assignment, I said, look, this assignment is comes right from my everyday experience. I'll be walking down the hall and, oh, Dan, you're the audio guy. Um, I want to do some recording. What should I get? And I said, well, we have to talk a little bit. What do you want to do, first of all, and how much money do you have? So it was something that enough students were asking me, to help them with that I thought it would be good to, have them all do it in our one of our intro classes. So it does tend to be something that well, it's relevant for them, so they're interested in doing some of this stuff. But again, when I make them, okay, go ahead and write a paper, that's where it kind of that they push back sometimes against my idea to do this. How come we're not making records, kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, you've got people who are very passionate about music, I would hope.
I do, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And we have had that discussion. You know, there are still completely 100% AI generated, music that is actually on the charts until, Billboard decides that they're going to take that out. Um, what do you all think about that? And I was super proud of them. They hated that idea. And I said, "Oh yeah, well, what's the big deal, And I have this one kid, he's a real throwback. He's like he should be in the Doobie Brothers band, and he's talking to me and he just says, what I'm thinking and not saying to any of them. He
Hmm.
says, "Well, music has to have soul, Dan, and this AI generated stuff, I don't think it has any soul, at least, to him it didn't." And the class, like almost to a person, they were like all in agreement. Um, so yeah, we're dealing with some of that in music for sure. But yeah, some of my students are really kind of resistant to the idea of really using it for anything. Um, but I think if I introduce some things like this, they might be more receptive. I'll give it a try. It's time for me to do something different for sure. Because the assignment has been starting to have more and more problems, and people just, really struggle with it sometimes. And then there's some students who do a really great job. Um, but I want them all to do a great job, and I think this will maybe help a little bit. Think about it.
And the
Can I
good
ask
thing
you
to
a
do is
question?
what, I'm sorry, Sarah,
I
go ahead.
I just had a quick question for you. Um, so do you share AI generated music for them to analyze and compare?
Um, I haven't yet,
Okay.
but we probably should.
Okay.
The goals, our program is trying to turn out, you know, industry ready,
Oh yeah.
recording engineers and producers. And, you know, I do think there will always be a need for these folks. And when I point out like, oh, here's something that It appears to be 100% generated. There is no person. This vocal you're hearing is not a real live person, you know. And I don't even know how they create this, this record we're listening to. But if we put that up next to one of their mixes,
Mhm.
maybe we can, start uncovering some of the things that, would make artists actually want to hire recording engineers and record their own music instead of having a computer, make it for them.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
should do that.
Totally.
I know they'd be into it. They would be into that.
Yeah.
We do a lot of, critical listening and mix analysis and that kind of thing. Um, but I have not. I tend to stick to okay, this is an exemplar of mixing for this certain style of music. What do you hear? What are some of the things you notice? Can you incorporate some of these into your own work? Um, so yeah, maybe we should do some mix analysis of these AI generated hit records that are coming out. It'd be
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah. They're not into it. They feel like it's
Yeah.
a threat to their future, livelihood, but on a deeper level, they're really like they don't think it's cool that, again, it doesn't have any soul is what, my throwback kid was saying. And they all agreed. They all agreed. So maybe I should try to have them analyze and like tell me like where's the soul in this one where there's no soul in this one. That would be interesting. Yeah.
Students in the arts, creative writing, and pottery and music tend to be generally opposed to AI unless they're in another class where they're asked to write a paper. And then suddenly that disappears. And a really good strategy for all faculty is to take their assignments and their existing assignments, upload them to an AI platform just to see how well it will do. And that will perhaps start people thinking a little bit more about alternative ways of trying to assess the same process. Javed and Genevieve, any thoughts on how to do this in economics? I know we have so much intrinsic interest from our students in our discipline, especially in the intro classes, but any thoughts?
This
Okay.
this PDF file behind the final answer is so interesting because I teach, as you know, intermediate micro, where I assign like writing an essay or writing assignment for that course. And I do have this detailed instruction providing what you need to do, and even my students are allowed to use AI, and even I encourage them to just use AI, but I have very like specific instruction how you use AI because the thing is I do have this first draft that they need to submit, and I read and write them some feedbacks, and for the second draft, which is the final one, I have this AI instruction which I just ask them to go and use AI and submit the first draft and write a reflection. So they need to submit like two documents. It's their paper, the writing assignments, and they need to write like a separate file as AI reflection that how they use the AI and what they did do, and what kind of suggestions they got, and did they accept those suggestions? Did they apply those suggestions? And I ask them, sometimes AI is wrong and you need to be careful. If you see such a thing, you need to write down why you didn't go with that suggestion. So they need to just show me why or why not they go with the AI suggestions. But the file that you just submit, this is interesting. I'm going to just, use this and try to revise that writing instruction. To be honest, I just submitted to Gemini my instruction right away, and I just submitted this file and asked Gemini, how can I revise right now um, my writing assignment. Let me just share this with you because this is somehow
Sure,
interesting. If you let me to share this result, can I do that?
sure, sure.
Uh, Let me see which one is that. Hmm. I do have three screens here, and I don't know which one is the one that I need to share. Which one is Gemini? Is it this one? Yeah, I think this is the one. Let me just, oh no, let me just stop because let me just go to this bigger screen. Okay, right now share. Um, I think this is the one. Can you see the screen? Yeah.
Shortly.
So
Yes.
what I did, so I just, uploaded the instruction that I already designed, and I just, uploaded the behind the final answer, and it just asked, based on this file, what do you suggest to revise? And it gives me, nice, for example, here, make the invisible pre-writing process visible, transparent AI use expectations, and deepen the meta cognitive reflection, and just gives me some, suggestion how I can revise my uh writing assignment. Some of them I like, to be honest. And I need to just, spend more time to see how I can revise that. But this is, I mean, it's really cool. I mean, it's really important because I see the students, some of my students, they're just, to be honest, copy and pasting using AI. But some of them are interesting. They still do not use AI because I see obvious mistakes, but I do not expect AI does make that kind of mistake. Some of them are not using that much. But the most important I would say, change in that assignment is that reflection that I saw. You need to write down why, how you used AI, and what kind of suggestions you got to improve your essay, and what did you do. Um, but yeah, I mean, I need to spend more time to see how I can redesign this based on the material uh, you talked about today. Well, let's see how it goes.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. And even I do have this because I do have the rubric that how I grade students, and I just again submitted to see how Gemini um would like to just redesign my rubric, and it has some, um suggestions here to make it more productive. So it was really interesting to see how we can use AI to just uh, have a more productive writing assignment.
That's a great example of using AI productively to help
And
improve student learning. Excellent.
yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you for
So
sharing.
maybe I have just a little thing to add to that.
Okay.
So I think everyone has already mentioned the most important stuff, which is like reflection. So I was actually part of the AI fellowship, and we had to revise one activity in course to match basically like what was presented right now. And one thing that I had done, I think I presented on it a year ago or something, was the tilting it. Like I think John did a session on it a few days back. So tilting it, what it did for me was that I explained for every step. So it was kind of scaffolded. So we had it in stages, just like you presented here. So we want to see the process, right? So for each step, I explained clearly why they needed to learn the skill. What were the objective there, right? So what am I going to achieve from developing this skill and not letting AI do it for me completely? So after everything, when I piloted this in my class, I think we've done it twice in labor economics. Students were really surprised as to how they could think differently from AI because they saw the AI results and it was online, so they could see everybody else's work and they realized, okay, this is average across all of us. Like AI is assuming similar things for us. Then in the next step, when they put in details about the although it was math, they had to do a calculation, but there were variables where they could tweak and make it more personal, like which school do I want to go to? Is it in an urban area? Is it in a rural area? So fees will vary, discount rates. My economists here will understand. So it has to do with how I view, using money today versus tomorrow and all of that, the rates at which I will go with. So when they varied these things and applied it to their real or personal situation, they realized that the calculations changed. So when they did it by hand compared to doing it on AI, they realized the answers were different. And then the way they would interpret the answers were pretty different from what AI did. So in their reflection, they were really happy about this. They were thankful that they were able to attain these skills or practice these skills and then see how AI did it differently. Yeah.
Great example. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think you're up next, Judy.
All right. So just to reiterate, the point here is not to create more complex assignments for the sake of complexity, but just to preserve the evidence of rigor and of learning, even though we're in this AI-rich environment. Okay. And so, and I think the conversations we just had, I think everybody's right on target here. And the best way that we can see right now is to start small. It's got to be manageable on your end. So if you just start with one high value assessment and rework that one, and then as you're going along, in the future, just try to add more updates. Because one, like you'll just start this momentum, right? Like if you have, say, your first big assignment is already reworked to show all these types of evidence, then it kind of sets an expectation for the students. And as you're grading, you're going to see the difference in what the students have done. And I think that momentum will spur you into updating the other assessments too as you go along. But so, like you have to balance it, right? To balance the workload with the updates. So actually,
Okay, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question or add to something. So you mentioned something about complexity, and it's been something on my mind because as we scaffold these assignments and break them down so much, like Sarah's first writing assignment was a simple, 2-line, and my assignments were like that in the past. But now they are like a whole page because we have to break them down so we see the process, right? And I keep wondering, is it becoming too cumbersome for our students? Like, if I have 5 of such assignments, are there ways that we can make it simpler?
So that's a good point. So there's 2 things that I try to do in my own courses. I teach history, American Revolution, in fact, but just referring to the sample that Sarah had. One thing I do is I try to keep my rubrics down to ideally I just have 5 criteria. And I like it that way because it's manageable for me. I had assignments, like my students have to write blog posts. And at one point, I think I had like 14 different criteria, and it was ridiculous for me to grade all that and to give them like 1 point for this and 2 points for that. And so I started to cluster the requirements a little bit better and try to keep it down to 5. So it's easier for me to grade, but the expectation is still there because I can give them a bulleted list of all the things they need to include in their blog post, but it doesn't mean I need to grade every bullet separately. So I think that that helps. And then the other thing I do is try to, um, I really, so if I have a 15-week course, I try to structure it all around what learning outcome they're meeting that week, or what, like what is the main goal of the week. And then so going from week to week, I try to mix up what that demonstration of learning is so that it's more interesting for me to grade and it's more interesting for the students to do the work. So, and I just try to brainstorm ideas and come up with different things they can do. So like, they do the blogs, then they do, I have them do like a revolutions blog about the 18th century. And then when we get a few more chapters along, we do like a Cold War revolutions blog, right? So, and then they have to compare the two blogs and like what they learned when they wrote the first one, what they're learning now, 180 years later or whatever, and what has changed in between, so that they have to kind of synthesize that way and put a different perspective on it, or just mix it up by saying, if they're doing a discussion, have them include some sort of metacognitive reflection right in their post. So they could write discuss something like, Frederick Douglass and something he wrote that influenced, and so Frederick Douglass advocated for Chinese people to be allowed in the US and become citizens, way back in the 1870s. And so they have to read about that and then write about how is that relevant today, and where are, examples that we can find today that Frederick Douglass might comment on. But then they have to wrap it up with a statement that says, I used to think X and now I think Y. And so that they have to think about how their thinking has changed on either on Frederick Douglass, they're on the topic, on immigration, whatever it is. But and I think things like that, the comments and feedback I get from the students is they like to stretch their thinking a little bit. And when like a stretching of their thinking is built in to the expectation, I think they really benefit from that. Then I just try to do other things too, like have them draw a picture or make a thing out of paper that really throws them off because they don't expect that, but it challenges them. And they're proud of the little artifacts that they make. And so I don't know, it's just, I think to not, so like I want them thinking, but it doesn't mean they have to write about their thinking all the time. They could do something else. They can draw, they can create, they can think while they're folding paper or whatever, and still be able to show that they did this thing and explain in a few sentences how this influenced them, how their thinking changed, and what they got out of it at the end. So I can say to them, do you think you met the learning outcome? Which really, at the end of the day, that's what we want to know. And, and they can say, yes, I met it because I did this thing, or I read this thing, or I used to think this way and now I think that way.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if that helps you or.
It does. It does. So building more variety across the term based on the learning objectives and kind of more metacognitive reflection on what they're doing. I like that. Thank you
Yeah.
for the example.
I'd like to jump in just a little bit because I think Genevieve raised a really important question that actually beginning during COVID, we started adding more and more highly scaffolded assignments, and often we added more work for students and for ourselves. And all of the things we're talking about will involve a bit more work for students and a bit more work for us. So we want to keep it manageable. So perhaps not just doing things that are interesting, which is a really good idea, but maybe thinking about ways we can condense the number of activities we're doing. So we may not have to assess the same thing as many times and have students learn a little bit more deeply about the processes and perhaps spend less time doing repetitive work, because that's going to put more burden on them and more burden on us. So we do have to keep things manageable so we don't burn out and so students don't burn out.
Yeah, I like
Thank
to
you
think
for
of it.
that.
Yeah, I like to think of like if I'm dreading grading, then that means that, the students weren't really looking forward to those assignments either.
Yeah.
And I give them choice like Sarah does, so they can, if it is a paper, say they can do a video, a PowerPoint, a podcast, like they can do whatever they want. And
Mhm.
probably 70% will always default to the paper. But when I'm grading and a video pops up, like I'm smiling and happy and like I want to see your video. And it really grading is so much less tedious or onerous. And you think like, this is great. What are they doing now? And like you become curious about what they produced instead of here we go again. Here's another essay. Sorry, Sarah. No.
Oh no, I feel it. Trust me. And if I can just add real quickly, Genevieve, the
Yes.
project that I shared, it is complex. It has a lot of moving parts.
Mhm.
And what I did to accommodate that in my course was instead of having 3 units or 3 major pieces for the semester, I shifted things. So that way I was meeting CLOs, like Judy said, not 13 times because it's English, but I met it in this really good, thorough project. And I say to my students, you pick a topic that you're gonna love because you're gonna be working with it for a long time.
Okay. So like John is saying, maybe take out some of our usual assignments that we had
Yeah.
back then and then, put together maybe two or three. Because back in economics, we usually will have an assignment like every week. And now we kind of have to scaffold these. So it's becoming more and more cumbersome for students to complete these assignments each week and probably doing across other classes. So thank you very much for this input.
Yeah.
So we are pretty much at the end. So this has been really a good conversation. Thank you. But we just want to make sure, all those resources are in the folder. That QR code is in the tiny URL, both go to the folder that I put the link in the chat for. So, and then also, if you want to follow up with us, we're more than happy to have email conversations or Zoom meetings or what have you. But thank you for inviting us to come and chat with everybody. It's fun.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Now, one
Thank
thing
you.
I do want to mention about the resources is one of the resources, a collection of links to AI assignments created by other colleges and other faculty across the country. Many of them are broken down by discipline or by types of assignments. One of them is actually related to the resources that were created through something that Genevieve mentioned when she was part of one of the 2 IITG grants we had, first with five other institutions and the other time with 9. So we had a few hundred people throughout SUNY and about 36, I think, from Oswego in those 2 years who worked with creating AI related assignments over the last 2 years. Some of them are posted in a repository. And so if you look at the SUNY AI repository, those are primarily ones taken from, or at least the higher ed ones. This was also used for some K through 12, but some of the assignments that were created during this have been shared there. So that was part of a SUNY IATG grant. And thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.